The family of our departed brother, Vilo, the widow, the daughters Binaifa and Sia, as well as the son Elchi, the Kenya Diaspora Alliance, led by Dr. Sais Marasa, and the Kenya-US Bar Association, and all those present. Good afternoon. I'm honored and privileged to join you to celebrate a gracious and a great colleague. I honor and celebrate the family of Pheroze Nowrojee and the present and those who are present in this function. I very much wanted to be with you in the US for this celebration, but I had to cancel due to the Gen Z memorials that we have commenced here in Kenya today. In fact, I have just returned from a solemn memorial service at All Saints Cathedral, and I will be marching in solidarity with the youth on the 25th of June. I'm mentioning these events because Pheroze cared deeply about the Gen Z movement. I have watched the remarks he made exactly a year ago as Gen Z-led finance bill protests were unfolding in Kenya during a similar event honoring the now late Professor Ngugi wa Thiong'o in Atlanta. I also had the opportunity to meet with Pheroze and Vilo at their home early this year and share views on how to move our country forward. Pheroze and Vilo are indeed some of the very first people I consulted on my bid for presidency of Kenya. They both encouraged me to run for the presidency in the 2027 general elections to reset, restore, and rebuild our great country. To those of you who follow Kenyan news closely, I'm sure you now know that I formally declared in a television interview on Wednesday that I will be in the ballot for the 2027 presidential election. I'm very sad that senior counsel Pheroze Nowrojee will not see a David Maraga presidency when it happens. But it is precisely that point that makes me nostalgic about two defining traits of Pheroze Nowrojee: Pheroze the mentor and Pheroze the activist. Let me start with the Pheroze the mentor. If there is one defining and enduring characteristic of Pheroze as a professional, it is the number and the diversity of Kenyan lawyers that he mentored throughout his professional life. Pheroze possessed rare traits as a professional. He was a deep intellectual, a legal pragmatist, and an extremely gracious and humble lawyer. Those are no traits that often sit as a suit in a lawyer. Most of the brilliant lawyers tend to be arrogant and dismissive. In this way, Pheroze was an exception, which made him not just an endearing, but also an intriguing personality. But this combination of rare salutary traits made him a perfect mentor and ultimately one of the lawyers who has had the most impact on the profession. Even more admirable is the diversity of the lawyers he directly impacted through his mentorship. Most of us would, of course, know of the public testimonies of senior lawyers and my peers such as Paul Mwite, Chief Justice Emeritus Will Mutunga, Gitobu Imanyara, Martha Karua, the current Chief Justice Martha Koome, and others who have given tributes of how much they benefited from Pheroze Nowrojee's peerage and mentorship. You may also know of Elisha Ongoya, a former dean of Kabarak Law School and a great trial lawyer. We recently watched him during the impeachment of the former deputy president, Gachagua. You may also know Christine Nkonge, the immediate former executive director of Katiba Institute, and one of Kenya's finest strategic litigators, and Julius Oweto, one of Kenya's most brilliant courtroom lawyers. All of them are generations down my generation. But they share the adoration and the endless personal stories of how Pheroze shaped their professional values and professional success. And then there is a young man known as Miracle Mudenyi. Mudenyi is currently a student at Kenya School of Law. Between him and Pheroze, there is at least a 60-year age difference. Pheroze mentored Mudenyi, who writes the following about him, and I quote, "The tributes pouring in spoke of a towering figure in the fight for human rights and constitutionalism. Yet for all his towering intellect and courtroom mastery, those of us who met him remember his warmth, humility, and the gentle smile that often preceded his incisive arguments." End of quote. I know there are so many Mudenyis out there who have been greatly impacted by Pheroze's professionalism and a sense of humility. In the legal profession, young lawyers do not often remember lawyers 60 years their senior for warmth or humility, for their smiles. They often remember them for their toughness and the intimidating aura. That is what made Nowrojee the great mentor he was. His adoration comes from that humility, even though for decades he was intellectually and in many ways always at the top of his profession. Let me now turn to Pheroze as an active citizen. One would think that for a lawyer of Pheroze's intellect, standing and professional accomplishment, activism would be the last thing on his mind. Because the path of shunning activism is the convenient path chosen by most successful lawyers who obsess about money and status, and there's always a lot of those, but not Pheroze. Indeed, Pheroze perpetually lent his intellect, his creative mind, his voice, and voice to diverse movements that worked and continue to work to make Kenya a great country. He rose to prominence for challenging Presidents Jomo Kenyatta and Daniel Arap Moi's excesses, including detention without trial that so many were subjected to in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. He worked closely with Jaramogi Oginga Odinga and other political luminaries to liberate Kenya from one-party dictatorship. He was a critical member and official of Ford Party, Ford Kenya Party, and the Social Democratic Party. Yet, despite being involved in party politics, he kept his integrity, his candor, and his unwavering focus on the larger mission of steering Kenya towards the path of constitutionalism and the rule of law, some of those traits that he and I share. Pheroze worked with public intellectuals and activists, not just in Kenya, but in the East African region and the African continent. He was a patriot, an African, but more importantly, he was deeply a Pan-African. He agitated for workers, for people living in informal settlements, for women facing sexual and gender-based violence. Pheroze spent time in those places the rich and powerful consider beneath them, graciously interacting with the diverse mosaic of Kenyans. This quote from the Wanjira Wanjiru of Mathare Social Justice Center sums this up quite well. And I quote, "About 2 weeks ago, we hosted the gallant social justice activist and human rights lawyer at Mathare Social Justice Center for an intergenerational session with senior comrade Pheroze Nowrojee. We are deeply saddened to learn of his transition. He leaves behind such a rich legacy. We honor and celebrate him always." End of quote. Now let me reflect on what I think Pheroze would have perceived of the role of the Kenyan diaspora in governance, human rights, and the rule of law. The fact that you are honoring Pheroze in the United States is a testimony of his impact on your lives. I understand that he was given awards before and spoke at major events organized by KESA under the leadership of Dr. Esther Obonyo, a Kodoi led by my friend David Ochwang, and One Voice Consortium chaired by Dr. Robert Chiuri. Thank you for recognizing one of Kenya's greatest senior counsel. Pheroze was a diasporan and a global citizen. He spent significant time outside the country studying, lecturing, traveling, and offering positive solidarity. His pathway to law was through schools in Kenya, India, United States of America, and ultimately through England, where he was admitted as a barrister. Before reflecting on what I believe Pheroze would have wished from the diaspora, let me first offer my own thoughts about the diaspora. First, I wish to appreciate the enormous and consequential contribution that the diaspora is to Kenya. Your intellectual contribution and being the voice for governance and accountability is quite commendable. You are not just supporting some of us and your relatives at home. You are literally partly propping up our country from economic collapse. Remittances from the diaspora are not only a major factor, but a core factor of sustaining our economy, surpassing tourism, agricultural exports, and foreign direct investment as a source of foreign exchange to our country. According to the central bank, in the first quarter of this year, you in the US sent home 1.25 billion US dollars. That is not by any chance a small amount of money. This is why the voice of the diaspora must not be ignored. This is why I continue supporting the right of Kenyans in the diaspora to vote. Your money must count. Your intellect must count. I intend to work with your representatives to push for more polling centers beyond DC, New York, and Los Angeles. The law provides for easy access to voting centers. There is no reason for someone to fly from Dallas, Houston, or Minneapolis to go to Washington, D.C. to vote. Second, we are aware of how hard you work, how focused you are to achieve the success you have. Even more than hard work, what awes me about the Kenyan diaspora is its sense of purpose, its uncompromising sense of focus. I personally know many Kenyans in the diaspora who have become so accomplished when all they brought from Kenya was $100 and a single suitcase of clothes. Yet through clarity of purpose, focus, hard work, you have achieved doctorates and other prestigious professional credentials, as well as building business empires. You have moved from the single suitcase to become very successful professionals and entrepreneurs. In many ways, our diaspora is the best window of what Kenyans can do and achieve if the government allowed them to a conducive and facilitative operating environment. But I'm also aware that the breakdown in the rule of law impedes your ability to invest effectively back at home here in Kenya. That the lack of respect for contracts, the trust deficit in the institutions, and the lack of predictability in the political environment are major setbacks. I have great hope that we can address these issues if we have leaders that respect and obey the law. We will, ladies and gentlemen, I can assure you that. Today, I have a challenge for you all, and I believe it is the challenge that Pheroze had for you. In the end, your individual accomplishments, however great, can never displace the need of our country to succeed as well. You cannot be settled until your people at home get the environment and facilities to enable them to thrive. Your success in the diaspora cannot displace your calling to be active citizens. For his civic consciousness and activism, I believe Pheroze would have wanted to see Kenyan engineers in the diaspora organize themselves and regularly petition the government of Kenya, the Kenya National Highways Authority, KURA, and KERA, to say you cannot continue building substandard infrastructure. Pheroze would have wanted the many medics and all professionals in the health sector in the diaspora to regularly petition the government, critique government health policies and plans, and offer the best and workable solutions on healthcare given their rich comparative knowledge. He would have told the many accomplished economists and professionals in the finance sector to actively engage the Kenyan government to achieve to advise against debt benching, corruption, and excessive lifestyles of senior public officers. Pheroze would have appealed to the many accomplished educationalists, psychologists, and sociologists to tell the government that being tentative and playing political games with the Kenyan education system is a crime to the current and the future generations of our country. Pheroze would have challenged landscapers and environmentalists in the diaspora to insist to Johnson Sakaja that he must get landscaping and city planning right, and not just obsessing with tinkering and patching up the city with cabro, making Nairobi a concrete jungle. Pheroze would have appealed for a return to the green city in the sun, with thriving trees and the carpets of jacaranda leaves, like the beautiful cherry blossoms of DC in the spring. Pheroze would have appealed to the influencers in the diaspora to speak up against the violence we saw in our streets this week. He would have asked you to march to the Kenyan embassies and the consulates abroad to express your disgust at the police violence and the killings, especially those of our youths. Pheroze would have asked you to raise your voices in support of the youth and I, as we march on the 25th against impunity. He would have asked you to provide your financial and moral support to campaigns for good governance and the rule of law. Pheroze would have appealed to you to register as voters and to vote in 2027. He would have called on you to vote for leaders with integrity and who are keen to reset the country to constitutional order and the rule of law. Pheroze would have said this to every professional in the diaspora, every person, and reminding them that this is a duty imposed on all of us by our Constitution. The duty to vote is a duty imposed on all of us by our Constitution. A duty to work towards achieving people-centric sustainable development. What I postulate above as Pheroze's challenge to you is also my challenge to you. Kenya is at a moment of inflection. We have a powerful, educated, and politically conscious youth who are fighting every day to make their country better. I invite you to join them, to support their efforts, not just through donations and remittances, but by organizing yourselves into diverse forces based on professional interests, your counties, and the constituencies of origin. This way, your contributions can effect changes in the farthest corners of our republic. I invite you to be part of the unwithering voice that consistently demands that Kenya must be better. And yes, I know that some of you are already doing this in your small ways, but we must organize better, we must be structured, we must be consistent, and we must be in it for the long haul. I'm doing my part, like as I stated earlier in this address. I have agreed to get myself into the dirty pool of Kenyan politics by declaring to run for presidency. If you don't give me support, I will drown. I am aware our politics are dirty, but we must work together to redefine how politics is conducted in Kenya. Let us reboot the politics in Kenya from that of grouped tribal majorities and opaque politicians to a majority that despite their ethnic origins can agree to be virtuous, ideological, and determined to respect, restore, and rebuild Kenya. I know we are in for the long haul. One colleague informed me that, accepting to run in 2027, I am going to be thrown into the mud pool. I am prepared for that with your support, and I have every reason to believe that we are going to succeed. I would like to seek your support in whatever way and form in my presidential bid. Ladies and gentlemen, please consider that as a bid for Kenya. I am interested in doing what we can to change our country. We have a great country. We cannot afford to have it run the way it is being run. I look forward to your partnership. Now I'll conclude with the words of Gina Jean in Basi Kavar about Pheroze Nowrojee. And I quote, "Nowrojee was not just a lawyer, he was a moral compass in an era where men choose silence." End of quote. Many choose silence when it is convenient. Pheroze would never sit and choose silence in the face of injustice. And like that ubiquitous quote, "The only thing that refuses to be buried with a person in their grave is their character." Let that character of Pheroze, or being a moral compass, in times like this, fool us in his death. Let us all be Pheroze. I thank you very much for listening to me in this celebration of a great man in Kenya. We will all remember a great man. Thank you very much. May God bless you.